The Life in the Hereafter. What does the Quran say? Translation of Jahan-e-Fada by Ajaz Rasul. Ghulam Ahmad Parwez 1969. 15 Barzakh Partition. There is a belief held among some people in the Islamic world that there is an interval between the time of death and the resurrection, during which the dead body gets either azab or sawab, i.e., punishment or reward. This is commonly known as azab-e-kabar, or punishment in the grave. There is no support in the Quran for this view. According to the Quran, there are 2 deaths and 2 lives. They will say, Our Rabb, twice have you made us without life, and twice have you given us life. 40:11. In Surah Al-Baqarah it is stated, How can you reject the belief in Allah, seeing that you were without life, and He gave you life? Then will He cause you to die, and will again bring you to life. And again to Him will you return. 2:28. In other words, the state before being born into this life was like death, and then a human being is born into this world, and this is called life. Then the life in this world will come to an end, and this is called death. After this another life will be given, and regarding when this second life will be given it is stated, After that, at length you will die. Again, on the day of judgment will you be raised up. 23:15-16. It is clear from this verse that this second life will be on the day of judgment. Therefore, the notion of another life between departure from this world and the day of resurrection on the day of judgment is a non-Quranic concept. The reality is that if we do not understand what death is and what life is, we cannot understand the truth stated in the Quran. Let us try and understand this through an example. The sounds broadcast from a radio station disperse as waves in the atmosphere, but we are not aware of their presence. We only become aware of the sounds when they reach our ears from a radio set which can receive these transmissions. Even before we become aware of these sounds, these were present and had not disappeared. Allah created this universe from nothing. Before this there was no material universe and there was no existence of life. Then, as per His laws, life emerged in the universe. We cannot say when and how this appeared. We only became aware of its existence when it appeared in a physical form. Then life passed through an unknown number of stages, to eventually reach its final form in the persona of a human being. We only become aware of human life at this stage. The Quran has called this stage as being life, and all the stages which were before this. From our perspective, as death, after life ends in this world, it progresses forward from its present stage, but we cannot be aware of this with the means of perception available to us. It is not that life has disappeared. It is very much present, but it goes outside the grasp of our means of perception, i.e., according to the above example, our radio set is out of order and the sound wrapped up in the waves does not reach us. The sound is still present, but we have no awareness of it. The Quran has called this state as death. Again, death number 2. After this our radio set is restored, and from our human point of view, life returns. This is called life after death. If we think that there is no continuation of life after a human being's physical death, and assume that we will get a totally new life on the day of judgment, which has no connection with this worldly life, this contradicts the concept of life after death presented by the Quran. The Quran clearly states that in the next life they will remember all of their lives which were lived in this world. They will recognize each other and will have knowledge and feelings of their mutual relations in this life. From this it is proved that there will be continuity of consciousness. Those people who believe in the materialistic concept of life, and consider that the center of consciousness, memory, is located in the brain, say that when the brain disintegrates after physical death, there can then be no question of any consciousness remaining. Contrary to this, the Quran says that consciousness is the human self, which remains even after the disintegration of the human body. In reality, this consciousness is the name given to those effects which are continuously imprinted on the human self throughout its life. The human self takes these effects with it, and goes forward to the next stage. What will be the form of these effects in the next life, we cannot say at our existing level of consciousness in our present life. But whatever the mode of their appearance in the next life, according to the Quran, the emergence is a reality. This is what is called Iman-e-bil Akhirat, the conviction in the hereafter. This is the reason that the Quran calls the human self, nafs, and consciousness as being synonymous. In Surah Zumar, this reality is stated in a very eminent way. It is Allah that takes the self at death, and those that die not, He takes, during their sleep. Those on whom He has passed the decree of death, He keeps back from returning to life, but the rest He sends to their bodies, for a term appointed. Verily in this are signs for those who think and reflect. 39:42. It is obvious that during the state of sleep man is physically alive, but his consciousness is suspended. On awakening, this consciousness becomes active, and this is called nafs, human self, by the Quran. Therefore nafs and consciousness are synonymous terms. After the death of man, this nafs or consciousness is withheld, but it does not disintegrate, nor is it destroyed or terminated. Therefore the belief that the consciousness will end and then another life will be given, is not a correct concept as noted earlier. According to the materialistic concept of life, the consciousness is totally destroyed or disappears after death. According to the Quranic concept of life, this does not happen. Life or consciousness is a continuously flowing stream which goes from the planes of this world, and enters into the gardens of the hereafter. Death is just a partition which is blocking our view across this stream of life, and while standing on the planes of this life we cannot see the stream on the other side because of this barrier. Therefore this belief is not correct. That all those people who die after death are held back in the graves, and then one day they will all be resurrected together, which is usually known as Hash, or the Day of Judgment. The reality is that the Day of Judgment of each one of us commences with death. From the Quran we also get indications in some places, where it appears that the effects on the human self-consciousness, will take a period of time before it can transform into another form. Before we progress further, it is important that we throw some light on the concept of the time interval or time itself. According to philosophical thinking, the concept of time is one of the most difficult problems of life in the universe. But we will leave aside the most difficult aspects of time and will only look at the common understanding of time. Only he can have awareness of time whose consciousness is awake. He who is sleeping has no sense of time. This awareness is only available to those who are awake. Similarly, the one who is under the influence of an anesthetic like chloroform also has no awareness of time. In common terms we can say that time is a relative thing. This is why philosophers call that time about which we do not have any conscious awareness of its passing, as that durationless time. 15.1 Barzakh partition. It is apparent from our discussion so far that in the so-called interval, in which the self-consciousness transforms into a new form, an individual will have no awareness of this. This is why the Quran states that at the time of regaining consciousness man will say in a surprised state. They will say, "Ah, woe unto us! Who has raised us up from our beds of repose?" 36:52. Note that this interval has been referred to as a state of sleep. In another verse regarding this interval it is stated, "Before, or after, them is a partition, Barzakh, till the day they are raised up." 23:100. In this verse, the word used in the Quran for before can mean both before and after. If the meaning is taken as after, behind, then it will mean that during this period the dead will not know about the life left behind in this world, and if the meaning is taken to be before, in front, it will mean that their consciousness will not be awake yet for the future life to come. It will be as if they are in a state of slumber. 15.2 The dead cannot hear us. As far as this world is concerned, after death man has no contact with the life left behind. At that time in the hereafter, when he will gain consciousness, he will remember all the details of his previous life, but he will not know anything about what has been happening in the world after his death. This is why the Quran has clearly stated, "And those whom you invoke besides him have not the least power." If you invoke them, they will not listen to your call, and if they were to listen, they cannot answer your prayer. On the day of judgment, they will reject your partnership, and none, O man, can tell you the truth, like the one who is acquainted with all things. 35:14. An answer can only be given by one who can hear. 6:36. And you can never make the dead to hear. 30:52. You cannot make those who are in the graves hear. 35:22. The dead and the living can never be equal. 35:22. The ones to whom people call standing at the graves do not even have an idea of who is calling to them and what he is saying, so much so that they do not even have any knowledge of when they will be resurrected. 46:5. See also 16:21. And in this there is no distinction between the great and the small. After death, all will have the same status and condition. And in addition, the Quran addressed the last messenger, saying that death will come to you as well as to others. 39:30. 15.3 The life of those who die in the path of Allah. About those who die in the cause of Allah, the Quran has declared in one place, "And say not of those who are slain in the way of Allah, they are dead. Nay, they are living, though you perceive it not." 2:154. In another place, "Think not of those who are slain in Allah's path as dead. Nay, they live, finding their sustenance in the presence of their Rabb." 3:169. In these verses there are one or two points which require further attention. These people are alive, but their life is unlike the life of human beings living in this world, because we can understand the worldly life, whereas about the other life it is stated that we cannot understand its reality. Therefore that life is different from the life here in this world. They are alive with their Rabb, therefore they have no remaining contact with this life. Further, it should be kept in mind that the Quran has clearly stated that death is for every living being. 3:184. Even as stated earlier, for the messengers of Allah and none is exempt. 39:30. Therefore what we call death comes to those who lay down their lives in the cause of Allah. So their living, as mentioned in the above verses, relates to the next life and not the present life in this world. A great deal has been discussed in the Quran about the people who sacrifice their lives for the cause of Allah. But in the light of what has been explained above, we understand that the interval we have discussed earlier, in which there is a temporary suspension of consciousness after death, will not apply to those people who have sacrificed their lives for the cause of Allah, as they are exempted from it. The procedure for the development of the human self is that when a clash arises between a permanent value and a worldly benefit, then whichever person preserves the permanent value by sacrificing the worldly benefit, this deed of his will enhance his self-development. It is now obvious that in such clashes, the time which is most testing and demanding of courage is that in which a man lays down his life to stand up for the truth. because there is nothing dearer in this world than life. So whichever man in such a situation willingly and happily lays down his life for the defense of truth, his self develops to such an extent that he does not have to pass through this interval of temporary suspension of his consciousness after death. In the continuity of their self-consciousness, there will not be an iota of interruption. This assumption of ours is supported by another verse. They rejoice in the bounty provided by Allah, and with regard to those left behind, who have not yet joined them in their bliss, they glory in the fact that on them is no fear, nor have they grief. 170. This indicates that their consciousness will awake immediately with the time of death, and there will be no temporary suspension between death and the next life. Furthermore, it should also be understood that if an individual participates in a fight or war for the sake of truth and justice against evil and is not killed but returns victorious, then he also will not be deprived of this greatest reward which comes to those who are slain. Martyrs. Such people also have such a higher grade. 157, 4. 74, 9. 111 to 112. 15.4 The state of consciousness in the next life. From some verses of the Quran it appears that in the next life consciousness about time will be different when compared to this life. So the estimate of the amount of time spent in this life will be different by people in the next life. In Surah Yunus it is stated, "One day he will gather them together. It will be as if they had tarried but an hour of a day. They will recognize each other." 10:45. See also 46:35. In Surah Rum, "On the day that the hour will be established, the transgressors will swear that they tarried not but an hour. Thus were they used to being deluded. But those endued with knowledge and assurance will say, Indeed you did tarry within Allah's decree to the day of resurrection, and this is the day of resurrection. But you were not aware." 30:55-56. In other words, both categories of people, the good and the bad, will not be able to estimate the amount of time spent in the previous life, but will say that only Allah has knowledge of its correct duration. In Surah Mominun, Allah will ask them regarding how long they stayed in this world. He will say, "What number of years did you stay on earth?" They will say, "We stayed a day or part of a day." But ask those who keep account. 23:112-113. In Surah Taha it is noted, "In whispers will they consult each other. You tarried not longer than 10 days. We know best what they will say, when their leader most eminent in conduct will say, You tarried not longer than a day." 20-103-104. From this it is clear that the state of consciousness at least about time will be different in the next life from this world. More details about this will be covered later.